Ano nga ba ang utilitarianism?
Actually, maraming definition ang utilitarianism. Pero bago tayo dumako sa sentro nito, hayaan mong bigyan ko kayo ng trivia tungkol dito. Trivia number 1. Ayon kay David Hume, ang ethics daw ay nakabatay sa kung ano yung pinaka-useful upang matukoy kung ang isang aksyon ay tama o mali. Nararapat daw na ating tingnan ang pinaka-pakipakinabang sa isang sitwasyon. Trivia number 2. Francis Hodgson believed that happiness was the most important in determining what is the right or wrong. So, para ma-determine mo yung tama sa mali, ito ay nakasalalay sa happiness mo. May kanya-kanya tayong definition ng happiness, minsan tama sa'yo, sa iba naman mali. Minsan mali sa'yo, tama naman sa iba. Trivia number 3. Jeremy Bentham, one of the first utilitarian viewpoint, he wanted to create a system of right or wrong that will benefit all the society. Sabi pa niya, principles of utility, maximize pleasure, minimize pain. So ready na ba kayo malaman kung anong ibig sabihin ng utilitarianism at paano ito nakaka-apekto sa bawat isa sa atin?
Ngayon na nga, atin ang alamin kung ano nga ba ang utilitarianism.
Utilitarianism is identifying the right or wrong in every action and focusing on the greatest good of the greatest number. Ine-emphasize niya yung ends over means. It calls for the maximization of goodness in society.
The basic characteristic of utilitarianism. Moral best things to do is to promote everyone's values, with all values treated equally. May iba din mga philosopher na nagsasabi na ang moralidad daw ay consisting of promoting only some values, so pili lang, or they promote values as more important than other values. Principle of utility. The best action is that which produces the greatest happiness and or reduce pain. The greatest happiness we ought to do that which produces the greatest happiness and least pain for the greatest number of people.
Types of utilitarianism. Act utilitarianism considers only the result or consequences of a single act. Each act is considered on its own merit. Dito, lahat ng actions mo could be justified in terms of consequences, even murder. So, basta ma-justify mo yung magawa mo, maaari kang mapawalang sala sa kung ano man yung magawa mo. Second, rule utilitarianism considers the consequences that result of following a rule of conduct. Dito naman, by the word itself, rule. So, ruling. Merong ruling tayo na sinusunod. Kung ang ginawa mo ay nasusulat or nasa panuntunan ng anuman, ang kaakibat ng consequences sa rule na yun yung babalik or maihahatol sa'yo. Ideal utilitarianism denies that the sole object of moral concern is the maximizing of pleasure or happiness. Dito naman, more on individual. They consider their own utility. Pipiliin mo kung ano yung makakapagbigay ng pleasure sa'yo without considering the other people. Negative utilitarianism challenges the moral symmetry of pleasure and pain. Dito, hindi kino-question or pinututuunan ng pansin ng pag-enhance ng kasayahan ng mga taong masaya na. Ibig sabihin, kung masaya ka na, hindi mo na kailangang sumaya ng masigit ka. Bagkus, mag-focus ito sa pag-minimize ng pain at suffering. So, and the last one, preference utilitarianism. It values actions that fulfill the greatest amount of personal interest as opposed to actions that generate the greatest amount of pleasure. So, ito yung satisfaction na mararamdaman ng isang tao by their own preference. Kagaya na nabanggit ni Ma'am Yai last time, maaaring hindi tama sa paningin mo yung ginagawa ng iba, pero sa paningin nila, tama yun. So, nakadepende ito sa preference ng bawat. individual.
How to make ethical judgment in utilitarianism. In utilitarian approach, moral judgment is based on the consequences of our actions, what is good is, and what results in the outcome for the greatest number of people. Dapat ang resulta o ang bunga ang siyang sukatan ng tama o mali. Meaning, ma-identify mo dapat sa judgment mo ang tama o mali based dun sa results or sa maaaring kahihinatnan hindi lang para sa iyo. Kailangan mo ding i-consider ang makabubuti sa nakakarami.
Utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is an ethical theory that determines right from wrong by focusing on outcomes. It is a form of consequentialism. Utilitarianism holds that the most ethical choice is the one that will produce the greatest good for the greatest number. It is the only moral framework that can be used to justify military force or war. It is also the most common approach to moral reasoning used in business because of the way in which it accounts for costs and benefits. However, because we cannot predict the future, it's difficult to know with certainty whether the consequences of our actions will be good or bad. This is one of the limitations of utilitarianism. Utilitarianism also has trouble accounting for values such as justice and individual rights. For example, assume a hospital has 4 people whose lives depend upon receiving organ transplants: a heart, lungs, a kidney, and a liver. If a healthy person wanders into the hospital, his organs could be harvested to save 4 lives at the expense of 1 life. This would arguably produce the greatest good for the greatest number, but few would consider it an acceptable course of action, let alone the most ethical one. So, although utilitarianism is arguably the most reason-based approach to determining right and wrong, it has obvious limitations.
In determining the quantity of happiness that may be produced by an action, by evaluating the possible consequences by applying several values, or IDC, PFPE na tinatawag. Intensity. How intense is the pleasure of pain? Duration. How long does the pleasure of pain last? Certainty or uncertainty. What is the probability that pleasure of pain will occur? Propensity or remoteness. How far off in the future is the pleasure of pain? Fecundity. What is the probability that pleasure will be the lead to other pleasures? Purity. What is the probability that the pain will lead to other pains? And last, extent. How many persons are affected by the pleasure?
The rightness of action is determined solely by their consequences. Utility is the degree to which an act produces pleasure. Hedonism is the thesis that pleasure or happiness is the good that we seek and that we should seek. A right action produces the greatest good consequences and the least bad. The consequences to be considered are those of everyone affected and everyone equally.
So, application of utilitarian theory. For example, you attempt to help an elderly man across the street. He gets across safely. Conclusion, the act was a good act. Number 2, you attempt to help an elderly man across the street. You stumble as you go. He is knocked into the path of a car and is hurt. Conclusion, the act was a bad